We now have a Bible reading, Esther 4:12 to 17. Here. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions.
Thank you. It's great that I can be here joining you, Forbes Baptist Church. It's been a while since I preached here last. I think it was in the Book of John, and that was a good couple of years ago, I would think. So thanks for having me back here. Things happen for a reason. I think sometimes you've got to have faith that there's someone up there who knows what he's doing. These were the words of a good mate of mine, as together we sat under the stage at the little theatre in Parks, dressed as guards, ready to deliver lines, and burst out of the trapdoor at the end of Act 1. We didn't get to discuss it any further because at that point we were worried our mics might have come up, and instead of hearing, "Open this door in the name of the wizard," they may have heard our profound words. Luckily for us, they hadn't come up yet. The context for his quote: that night on the way to the theatre, it was our second last show, he'd hit a roo with his car. He was already running late, and we got the message that he may not make it in. As it was, he managed with the help of his family to arrive just in time. We were discussing it under the stage in one of our brief breaks from being on stage or being in the change rooms. Little did we know how things were yet to unfold. The lead, Hannah, she was so ill that night that she had to be rushed to hospital during intermission. Also at intermission, one of the other leads spilt boiling water down her leg. Just something else to add to the chaos. It looked like we were having to cancel, but we decided as a cast that we'd at least do some of the ensemble numbers for the audience who were there. But also because we wanted to farewell Bill, who he was retiring from acting, and he had a lot of his family in the audience. The result was an incredibly emotional conclusion. We sang our songs, Bill sang his song, we gave him a farewell moment. And then his daughter came, and she sang the closing number from the show in the place of the lead, the song "For Good." It was a song that she had recorded for her mother prior to her mother's passing from cancer. There was hardly a dry eye in the theatre. The next day was to be our closing show. We thought it'd have to be cancelled. But coincidentally, the music director's daughter happened to be up for the show. She's an opera singer and a seasoned performer who, at the last minute, agreed to step into one of the hardest female roles in musical theatre, just so our show could go on. And so we had our closing. Wow. Amongst all the emotionally exhausted chaos that unfolded, I was left thinking about that moment under the stage. Things happen for a reason. Did they? Why is it that people hold to this idea? Is it even true? This morning's message goes some of the way towards answering these questions. And unusually, we're actually going to turn to the only book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned, the Book of Esther. But before we begin, let's pray. Father God, we just thank you for the chance to gather, be it in a different way, that we can gather and we can hear your word, that we can learn more of who you are. And in this time of craziness, we can see that we have a God who's in control. We thank you for the promises that are in there. Write it on our hearts and help us to trust you. Amen. Now, I encourage you to take the time to read the Book of Esther. It's not that long, and it's not hard to do in one sitting. It's one of the best known and best loved of the scriptures by the Jewish people. It's a story that is told every year at the Feast of Purim. At each telling, it takes on a pantomime kind of feel, with listeners encouraged to interact with the story, notably with a shout of, "May his name be blotted out," with every mention of Haman. And so I thought for the first week, we might take the time briefly to retell the story together. Now, I've got a few volunteers by virtue of the fact that they are here, who are going to help us this morning. So I'd invite them to the front now. I'll just step to the side and I'll let the cameraman deal with how he's going to get us all in. Okay, now, each of our volunteers has a script and has some hats. Now, depending on which hat they are wearing is which character they will be playing. Over here we have, what's your first hat say?
Official.
So we have an official. So when he's wearing that hat, he's an official. His other characters are?
Eunuch number 2.
Eunuch number 2, which is the blue hat, and?
Haman.
Haman, the jester's hat. Okay, now Matt, what's your characters?
I don't know.
Matt is either the king, King Xerxes, or?
Mordecai.
Mordecai, what a guy. Okay, and Tracy?
Eunuch.
Eunuch?
And Vashti.
Vashti and?
Eunuch number 1.
Yes, and you are also an official, and you are also Esther. You have multiple characters, lots of characters here. So let me introduce now our production. The Forbes Baptist Players, in our inaugural performance, bring you the story of Esther. A long time ago in an empire far away, the kingdom of Judah had fallen to the Babylonians and its people taken into exile. But the Babylonian Empire itself had been overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. Some Jews were permitted to return to rebuild their homeland, while many others remained scattered across the Persian Empire. Our story begins in the year 484 BC during the reign of Xerxes, in one of the 3 capital cities, the summer palace of Susa. It so happened that in the 3rd year of his reign, King Xerxes was in the mood for celebration.
I am king over everywhere, from India to Kush.
Oh, wow. I don't know where that is.
I've been king for 3 years, and this is cause for celebration.
What do you want done, Your Highness?
Let us have a year-long triennial celebration, followed by a week-long feast, and all the drinks are on me.
And it so happened that at the end of the week-long feast, the king was feeling merry and proud at having displayed all his wealth and power. As a finale, he wanted to display before all the kingdom his dutiful and beautiful wife.
Vashti, come out here. Let everyone see how beautiful my queen is.
No, I am not coming out. I am my own woman.
How embarrassing. This makes me very angry.
Your Highness, it is worse than you realize. Half your kingdom are women, as is my wife. Just think what could happen if they all do this.
And so the king decided that in order to maintain stability across his empire, he would make an example of Vashti and banish his queen. But this in itself had created a problem.
I'm lonely. I miss my little Vashti.
Oh, well, maybe we can find a replacement.
I've got an idea. Let's round up every beautiful single woman in the city. Send them for a year-long beauty spa, and then you can take your pick of them.
I'm loving the ethnic makeup of Susa at this time. It's great, guys. It happened that there was a Jewish family living in Susa, and in that family was an orphan girl named Esther living with her, well, I've said Uncle Mordecai, cousin Mordecai. She happened to be very attractive.
Hey, you are so good looking. You've got to come with me.
Oh, Uncle Mordecai, they want to take me away. What do I do?
Don't worry. It'll all work out okay. Just go with them, my dear Essie.
And so it happened that at the end of the year, Esther was brought to the king, and she won his favour, and he made her queen. However, she kept her identity secret and didn't reveal it that she was related to Mordecai. Now Mordecai had a position of importance at the king's gate, and so it happened that one day while by the gate, he overheard the two eunuchs plotting.
Oh, I don't like this king. Let's kill him. Let's rub him out.
Yes, I agree. We should kill him.
I'll tell Esther, and she can warn the king.
And so it happened that Esther reported this to the king. Oh, I've lost my spot. Reported this to the king in the presence of one of the king's official historical record keepers.
Oh, king, Mordecai from the gate just told me that 2 of your eunuchs are planning to assassinate you.
Find out who they are and hang them.
Just a minute. I've got to write this all down. Mordecai uncovers big plot to kill king. Got it.
So what Mordecai had done was recorded in the official histories. The 2 eunuchs were put to death. This led to a political reshuffle. And so the king appointed to a position of power a man named Haman. Now at this point I'm just going to interrupt briefly. If you will all hear, what the Jews do in the retelling of this story is when Haman's name's mentioned, they all boo, they bash, they have these rattly things, they make all these noise. So the guys that are here, that are in the building, when you hear the name Haman, I want a nice loud boo or bash your chairs or do something. Okay. And so it happened that to a power that a man named Haman. He commanded that all should pay homage to him.
I am mighty Haman. Bow down to me.
You better do as he says.
No way. I'm not bowing down to him. A Jew bows to no one.
And so it happened that Mordecai's refusal caused Haman to fill with rage against Mordecai and all the Jews. And so he came up with a plan to exterminate them. He cast lots to determine a date on which to wipe them all out. Then, having resolved a scheme, he approached the king.
Oh, great king. There is some rebel race of people right across your kingdom, and I happen to have this big pile of silver that you might be interested in. If I give it to you, would you mind if I just killed all the Jews?
Oh, did you say silver? All right, Haman. I'll agree then. Just get my official here to put in a letter, and I'll sign it.
Okay, I think I got all that down. Kill Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month. Copy to every governor in every province from India to Kush. Just got to go. Send. There, done. Haman, just as you requested.
Now, when this became known by the Jews across all the provinces, there was widespread mourning accompanied by fasting, and they clothed themselves in sackcloth.
Look, we are all going to die.
Is that Mordecai down in the gate, by the gate in those rags?
Oh no, Uncle Mordecai, what is he doing?
And so Esther inquired of Mordecai as to why he was doing what he was doing, which is what we read earlier in today's Bible reading, so we won't go into that any longer. Esther resolved that she would approach the king, but this was going to be risky. Unless the king extended his staff to her, she would be risking her life. But it so happened that on the next day, as Esther was in court, the king invited Esther to appear before him.
What would you like, Esther? I'm feeling very generous today.
I was wondering, would you and Haman like to come for dinner?
That would be lovely.
Oh, wow, dinner with the king and queen. I am so important.
And so Haman and the king dined with Esther. And after dinner, the king extended that same offer.
Esther, that was delicious. I'm still feeling generous. Anything you want, up to half the kingdom. Just name it, it's yours.
Well, I was wondering, would you and Haman like to come back for dinner tomorrow night?
Woohoo! I am popular. You can count me in.
Haman's accent's just changed significantly. And so merry and full of joy on his way home, Haman, we need to hear some booing here from this. Haman so happened to pass by Mordecai at the king's gate. Seeing Mordecai filled him with rage, and so on arriving home he was greeted by his wife.
Hi, dear. How was your dinner with the king and queen?
That was okay, but I'm so angry! How can I be happy when Mordecai is there? I want him dead!
I've got an idea. Why don't you build some gallows? Hang him now, don't wait. You can get the king to arrange it tomorrow morning.
And so Haman set about his plan to hang Mordecai. But it so happened that on that very night the king couldn't sleep.
I can't sleep. Read me something boring that'll send me to sleep.
I've got a history book here. Let me flick it open. Oh, this should put you to sleep. Now I'll read from here. It's called Mordecai and the Big Plot.
And so it happened that the attendant read to the king the story of how Mordecai had saved the king's life.
I was supposed to put me to sleep? That was amazing. What was done to reward that guy?
Nothing.
Well, we should do something.
And so it happened that just at this point, Haman entered the king's court.
What a great day! Now, I've just got to ask the king if I can hang Haman.
Hang Mordecai, I think you'll find Haman.
Mordecai!
Hey, man, I want your advice. There's this guy, not mentioning any names. I think he's pretty awesome. I want to reward him. So, what do you reckon I should do?
And it so happened that Haman, in his pride, thought the king was referring to him.
Well, someone important. I reckon that you should give them a royal robe, dress him right up, and then put him on the royal horse and give him a street parade. Have him led around the city with someone to say how awesome he is.
Great idea. Let's make sure all that happens right away. To Mordecai.
And so, on the day that Haman had planned to kill Mordecai, he was forced to honour him before the entire city. He returned home that evening devastated.
I can't believe I had to do that for Mordecai. Worst day ever.
Dear, this is not good. I've got a bad feeling about all of this. But don't dwell on it. Off to dinner. You've got an appointment with the queen.
And so the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther once more, and the king once again was feeling favourable towards his queen.
Oh, that was delicious. Thanks for the invite.
Esther, I'm feeling generous again. Whatever you want, you know the drill.
Oh, king, this is my request. Spare my people. We have been sold to die, all of us. That includes me too.
Wait, no. Who did this?
It was him, that evil Haman.
Oh, no, I did, but no, I didn't intend.
You!
And so the king fled into the garden in a fit of rage. Esther was reclined on the lounge, and Haman fell on her, pleading for his life.
Please do something to save me.
Will you get off me?
And it so happened that the king re-entered the room just as Haman was falling onto Esther.
Wait, what are you doing with my wife? And while I'm in the house too? He should die for this.
And it just so happened that one of the king's servants knew of some gallows that had been recently built at Haman's house. Haman was put to death, and Esther was given his estate, and Mordecai given his position of power. Then once again the king extended his scepter to Esther.
Esther, whatever you want, just say it and it's yours.
O king, please can you revoke your last edict, that my people may live? And please, king, can you issue a new edict allowing us to avenge ourselves against all our enemies throughout the empire?
Absolutely. It shall be sent to every governor in every province.
Okay, I've got the answers written, copied, and sent, just as you ordered, King.
And so, on the very day that Haman had planned to destroy the Jews, by edict of the king, they were given permission to avenge and plunder their enemies. This continued for one more day in the city of Susa. The story of these events was recorded and became an annual feast of gift-giving and rejoicing for the Jews, which continues to this day. A festival known as Purim. Mordecai became second in power only to the king, and how else to finish it, but they lived happily ever after. Thank you to my cast of the Forbes Baptist players. You guys can take your seat. You're excellent. Love the accents. Very great. I hope you enjoyed that retelling. It's an intriguing tale in which, as I said from the outset, the name of God is never mentioned. Each event cascades and builds upon the next. We're meant to see that each person is making individual decisions in very real human ways with their own motivation, whether it be the king's pride, the queen's stubbornness, the advisor's fears, the political intrigue, the wisdom of Mordecai, the pride and deceitful hatred of Haman, the nervousness and resolve of Esther. All of it falls together like the pieces of a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. We're meant to see and understand something from how this plot unfolds, from what we see as all these pieces fall into place. Consider in particular the plot that Mordecai uncovers, that he goes unrewarded but recorded for posterity. Then consider the king's sleepless night. The decision on the reading material happens to be Mordecai and the big plot. Consider Haman's entry at that point, intending on Mordecai's death that very day. Consider the king's request to Haman about how to reward Mordecai, but leaving it so open that Haman is actually able to assume it's for himself. Consider Haman's stupidity and his pride in that. Then consider the outcome. What a turn of events. Or later, consider the king's walking in just as Haman falls upon Esther. Consider the king's resolve to hang him at that point. Consider the knowledge of the advisor that Haman owns a set of gallows. The result? Haman hung on his own pole. As a story, it's so coincidental that it kind of feels contrived, doesn't it? I think that's partly the point the Book of Esther is making. It's exactly like the jigsaw puzzle. The pieces falling one by one into place, and you realise that there is a greater purpose or power at work here. In the book where God's name is not mentioned, we're meant to see his fingerprints all over it. In fact, the key to understanding Esther seems to fall in Mordecai's speech to Esther, which we had read to us from chapter 4, verses 12 to 14. Come with me and let's look at it together. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows that perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. There's a couple of things to note here. First of all, note that Mordecai's speech infers a divine purpose. I'll have more to say on that next week. But suffice for now to point out the confidence of Mordecai. Though God is not specifically mentioned, we have here a statement of faith. Deliverance and relief would come. Mordecai states it as a certainty. Secondly, notice Mordecai's belief in divine authorship. Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. It's important to note here there is a degree of uncertainty. He says perhaps. Who knows? Mordecai is not saying this is certainly the case. It's not a name it and claim it moment. He does not know, nor can he guarantee the outcome. But what it reveals is that he does know there is a divine author. It reminds me of a scene from Lord of the Rings. Frodo says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." And Gandalf responds, "So do all who live to see such times. But that's not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There are forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil. Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you were also meant to have it." And that's an encouraging thought. The reality in Lord of the Rings is that as dark as the story seems to be at this time, there's a confidence that there is a greater power at work for good. It doesn't make the task ahead for the characters any easier. It doesn't make the outcome for them certain. They have choices, tough decisions, responsibilities. But what it does is convey is confidence. There's an author working out his plan for good. The same is true in Esther. There's no certainty of the outcome for the individuals in our story, but there is confidence. Mordecai the Jew knows his God. He is faithful to his promises. Mordecai can't say for certainty that Esther will succeed, but he certainly knows they have a God who can work it so that she does. You see, anyone who's familiar with Jewish history will see the unfolding providence of God in the lives of his people, even as individuals make all sorts of wild decisions about what to do with their lives. Take, for example, the story of Joseph, which, as I understand, you've been looking through in previous weeks. He suffered under the contriving of his brothers, slavery, slander, jail. Yet faced with his brothers once again, in Genesis 45, verse 4 to 7, we read, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' And when they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there'll be no ploughing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance.'" Joseph knew that God was at work, confidence that what he endured was part of God's plan. Or take the story of Saul and David. One rejected as king, the other chosen by God. But it's chapter upon chapter of all sorts of intrigue and personal decisions that lead to Saul's ultimate demise and death at his own hand, while David never once tries to claim the crown, but winds up king of Israel. We see that as men make their own plans, their own decisions, take their own actions, which they're all responsible for, there is a divine author at work. God's chosen king would be king. It's also what we see from the psalm we had read earlier to us, Psalm 33. We have people making plans, kings taking pride in power, but over all a sovereign God, a God who sees all, who knows all, and who works all things for the good of his people. Clearly, Mordecai knows his God. Psalm 33, verse 18 to 19. "But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and to keep them alive in famine." But what does this mean for Esther, and what does it mean for us? Furthermore, what comfort is it to us when, like Esther, the world seems to conspire against us? In his book, The Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn recounts many of the horrors of Soviet Russia, and in particular the arrest and the prison system. He recounts the tale of an astrophysicist, Nikolai Kozyrev, a brilliant man whose career was interrupted by arrest. He was kept in conditions that sent many insane. He kept himself sane by dwelling on the eternal and the infinite, the order of the universe, and the God behind it. In dwelling on the passing of time, he just longed to research deeper. But how could he? He was in a solitary prison cell with a kerosene lantern where not even a bird could enter. Please, God, he prayed. I have done everything I could. Please help me. Please help me continue. At this time, he was permitted to receive a book every 10 days. It was usually always the same book, read concert. Half an hour passed since his prayer, and they came to exchange his book. As usual, without asking anything, they pushed a book at him. It was entitled A Course in Astrophysics. Where had it come from? He couldn't even imagine it being in the prison library. He only had it 2 days when it was noticed in an unscheduled inspection, and it was removed. But he devoured it while he had it. One thing Solzhenitsyn makes clear is the place of faith in sustaining people in the darkest of times. It's interspersed throughout his writing. Even in a Soviet prison, there was hope in the fact that there was a sovereign God. Answered prayer in the form of a book on astronomy was enough for Nikolai. It was the glimmer of hope that kept him going. But it was also that hope that led him to cry out in prayer in the first place. This is Mordecai's response, and it's also Esther's response to Mordecai's words. We're not told explicitly, mind you, although I think we can assume that Mordecai wearing sackcloth is not a fashion statement, and Esther's request that all the Jews in Susa join her in fasting was not a revolutionary new diet regime. What is clear is that both are engaged in appealing to God regarding their plight. If what Mordecai is saying is true, there is a divine author, there is a divine purpose, then the logical thing to do is to appeal to him. And that's exactly what they do. Notice they're not alone in it either. They gather all the people they can in Susa. But it doesn't end there, particularly for Esther. It's clear that Mordecai's words cut through her fear and drive her to action. The thought of God being sovereign didn't make her passive, but rather it drove her to action. She took seriously the opportunity set before her, and she resolved to act, albeit very shrewdly. God's sovereignty did not mean Esther's passivity, but rather her prayerful action. Maybe Mordecai was right, and she had a role to play. And so she dutifully stepped into it. God works through the willing obedience of his people. But what does all this mean for us here today? Well, first of all, the God of Esther is our God. He is the author of life, and his divine purposes will prevail. We, like the Jews, have his promises to cling to. Nothing could resonate more with the book of Esther than the promise we have in Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. It's a statement that echoes the words of Mordecai. A divine purpose, a divine author. And then a few verses later in Romans 8:31 we read, "What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And then again in verses 37 to 39, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We're considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ. Friends, we can have confidence. Does the world we live in seem hostile? Do the decisions of our leaders seem crazy at times and getting crazier sometimes? Do we see conflicting agendas, political and the like, affecting our freedoms? Do you fear for the world our children are growing up into? Does anyone really know what's going to go on with this pandemic and who we can actually trust? What's going to happen to the church as a result of these challenging and divided times? Friends, all these things are true. But come on. Where is our confidence and faith against this? We have a God who is in control. Will we trust him? Will what is going on in our world drive us to prayer? Or will it divide us in despair? Furthermore, the God who placed Esther at this point in history for such a time as this knows the time and place of each and every one of us. Esther had the choice to be passive or be active. It took a lot of courage for her. The God who has drawn us to himself through Christ Jesus is not surprised by the time and place in which we live. We, like Esther, are not guaranteed any specific particular outcome as we live for him. Sometimes it takes courage. Perhaps he has placed you where you are for such a time as this. Will you be passive or active? But now I want to flip our whole story on its head briefly and look at it from a very different perspective. I've often read stories or novels where this idea of a predestined purpose seems to underlie much of the plot. But recently I read a very different story. As part of my research for the last theatrical production I was in, I read the novel it was based on. As our director says, I like to do my research. I'll say it's not a book I recommend at all for a number of reasons, but what I found fascinating and at times perplexing was that it was very clear there was some form of divine will or purpose written into it. But it was never clear what it was achieving or what it was working towards. At best, if there was some will at work, it was hard to discern the meaning or purpose from it. And if there was a purpose, it seemed malicious. I wondered why he wrote it like that. But then I came to this story. I want you to consider the story of Esther from Haman's perspective. Haman is described as an Agite, putting him as descending from the Amalekite enemies of Israel. Haman is diligent and deliberate in what he sets out to achieve. He has climbed the rungs of success and he's getting all his ducks in order. But as perfectly as his schemes seem to be planned out, he just can't take a trick. At every turn, he seems on the verge of victory, only to be thwarted. It must seem crazy from his perspective. It's like the universe is against him. But that's exactly it. Haman is marked by evil desire. In our day and age, we seem to struggle to accept a villain, and we like to create these redeemable qualities in them and in their origin stories. We don't have that here. Haman is motivated by evil desires and motives. We have a sinful, wicked heart bent on destruction of what is righteous and good. In Psalm 33 verse 10 we read, "The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples." Or consider the story then from the perspective of the king, the most sovereign of all men in the world. He doesn't fare too badly in this story, but in spite of all his power and wealth, we see problems in his household, dissension in his court, schemes and plots. I mean, what control does he really have? In Psalm 33 verse 16 to 18 we read, "No king is saved by the size of his army, no warrior escapes by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save him. But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him." The key to understanding how the sovereignty of God affects those in the story of Esther is in understanding their relationship to him. How you respond to him matters. Rejecting him, rejecting his rule, living in rebellion to the divine author means that eventually your doom is assured. Friends, do not live in rebellion to the divine author, because you can rest assured that if you do, he will certainly call you to account for it. There's much more I could say here, but we will get to that next week. What conclusions can we draw from today's message? I'll wrap this up fairly quickly. How should it impact us here and now? Friends, our God is King. Let us live for him with confidence, prayerfully, wisely acting in obedience to his call on our lives in the time and place he has placed us. And as we do, let's rejoice in his sovereignty. Yes, things happen for a reason. And for those of us who love God, that is good. Psalm 33 finishes with, "We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you."